Her ex made her car fall. A deliberate act of revenge that plunges her into a cold river and a colder truth. The hand that saves her belongs to a powerful mafia boss from a past she fled. He knows her secret, and his protection is a gilded cage from which there is no escape. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The world turned upside down, and then it went cold. Icy, dark, and brutally cold. Eleanor's scream was trapped in a bubble of air as her car plummeted from the bridge, the world outside her windshield a dizzying whirl of steel-grey sky and churning black water. The impact with the river was a deafening crash of shattering glass and groaning metal, the force of it slamming her against the seatbelt, stealing the breath from her lungs. Water, cold as a grave, poured in through the shattered windows. A relentless, rising tide. Panic, sharp and primal, clawed at her throat. She fumbled for the seatbelt release, her fingers numb and clumsy. "This is it," a voice screamed in her head. "He found me. Mark found me." The water was at her chest, then her chin. She took a last gasping breath before it closed over her head, the sounds of the world muffled into a terrifying, watery silence. She was trapped, disoriented, the murky water making it impossible to see which way was up. Her lungs burned. This was how it would end. Not in a blaze of glory, but in a cold, dark, anonymous death. The death she'd supposedly already had. Just as the edges of her vision began to darken, a hand shot through the broken window. It was a large, strong hand, with fingers that looked like they could crush stone. It grabbed her forearm, the grip impossibly firm, an anchor in the chaotic, liquid hell. She was hauled violently through the window, the jagged metal tearing at her clothes and skin. She broke the surface, choking and gasping, the cold air stinging her lungs. She was being pulled, dragged through the water towards the shore. Her savior was a powerful swimmer, his movements efficient and relentless. They reached the muddy bank, and he half dragged, half carried her onto solid ground before collapsing beside her, his own chest heaving. Eleanor lay on her side, coughing up river water, her body trembling uncontrollably from the cold and the shock. She could hear sirens wailing in the distance, growing closer. She turned her head, her wet hair plastered to her face, to look at the man who had saved her, and her blood ran colder than the river water. He was kneeling now, looking down at her, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs all over again. He was older, his face harder, the boyish softness she remembered carved away by time and what she could only assume was unspeakable violence. But she would know him anywhere. Luca Rossi. He leaned close, so close his lips were almost brushing her ear. His voice was a low, gravelly whisper, a sound that belonged to her nightmares and her most secret, forgotten dreams. "I know who you are," he breathed. The words weren't a question. They were a statement, a verdict, a reclaiming. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. No, 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 no. 5 years. 5 years of running, of hiding, of building a fragile, quiet life as Eleanor, the quiet librarian. 5 years of looking over her shoulder, of jumping at shadows. And in one single and catastrophic moment, it was all over. Her past hadn't just caught up to her, it had reached out with a strong hand and dragged her back from the brink of death, only to throw her into a different kind of fire. "Luca," she choked out, her voice a ragged whisper. A ghost of a smile, cold and devoid of warmth, touched his lips. "Hello, Stella." The name was a punch to the gut. Stella Rossi. The name she was born with. The name she'd buried with her parents. The name on a tombstone in a cemetery she'd never visited. Before she could form a response, his men, a small army of grim-faced suits, descended upon them, wrapping them in thick, warm blankets. Luca stood, his authority radiating from him like heat. He barked orders in sharp, fluent Italian. "The police are not to question her. Tell them she is in shock and is under my protection." "She comes with me." "Wait," Elena stammered. finding her voice. I have to talk to the police. My ex, Mark, he ran me off the road. He tried to kill me. Luca's gaze swung back to her, and the look in his eyes was terrifyingly calm. I am aware of Mark's actions. He is no longer your concern. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. He guided her, his hand firm on the small of her back, towards a waiting black SUV with darkened windows. It was less of a guide and more of a command. He put her in the back seat, slid in beside her, and the door closed with a soft, definitive thud, sealing her fate. The car pulled away from the chaos of the bridge, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles fading behind them. Eleanor huddled in the corner, the blanket pulled tight around her shivering shoulders, staring at the man beside her. He was no longer the 19-year-old boy she'd been promised to, the one who'd kissed her with a desperate passion in his father's rose garden. This was Luca Rossi, the Don, the boss. And he was looking at her as if she were a priceless painting that had been stolen from his gallery. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice small. "Home," he said simply, his eyes never leaving her face. "This isn't my home. My home is a small apartment across town with a cat and too many books." "That was a hiding place," he corrected, his tone leaving no room for debate. "A gilded cage you built for yourself. Your home is with me. It has always been with me." "You don't understand," she pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. "I can't go back. They'll kill me. My family are your family. They're all dead because of that name." "Your family is not all dead," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am here. And I have spent the last 5 years tearing this city apart, looking for the man who ordered the hit on our parents. I have spent 5 years building an empire strong enough to protect you when I found you. And now I have." Eleanor fell silent, stunned. She had assumed he believed she was dead. Everyone was supposed to believe she was dead. She had run not just from the killers, but from the life, from the destiny that had been chosen for her. She had run from him. The car moved through the city, eventually winding its way up into the hills, towards the old fortified mansions of the city's elite. They passed through imposing wrought-iron gates and up a long tree-lined driveway, stopping in front of a monstrously large, modern yet classic Italianate villa. It was a fortress. Luca got out and came around to her side, opening her door himself. He offered his hand. She hesitated, staring at it. The same hand that had pulled her from the river, the same hand that had undoubtedly ended lives. "Stella," he said, his voice soft but edged with steel. "You are safe now. No one will harm you while I draw breath. But you will not run from me again." Reluctantly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and he led her into the house. The interior was opulent and cold, marble floors, stark modern art, everything speaking of immense wealth and power, but no warmth. It was the house of a king, not a home. A stern-looking older woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Agnello, the housekeeper, was instructed to take Elena to a room and see to her needs. Elena was led up a sweeping staircase and down a long hallway to a bedroom that was larger than her entire apartment. It was beautifully decorated in creams and golds, with a balcony overlooking the city lights. The door clicked shut behind Mrs. Agnello, and Eleanor heard the distinct sound of a key turning in the lock. She was a prisoner. A treasured, well-dressed prisoner, but a prisoner nonetheless. She stood in the centre of the lavish room, her wet, torn clothes feeling like a grotesque costume in this palace of her past. She walked to the window, looking out at the glittering city below, the city where she had built a new life, a simple life, a life that was now gone. Mark had tried to kill her, but Luca had effectively erased her. He hadn't saved Eleanor. He had resurrected Stella, and Stella's world was a gilded cage within a den of wolves. Hours later, after a hot shower that did little to thaw the ice in her soul, Elena sat on the edge of the massive bed, wrapped in a plush robe. There was a soft knock at the door before it opened. Luca stood there, having changed into dark trousers, and a simple black sweater that did nothing to soften his imposing presence. He carried a small tray with a bowl of steaming soup and a glass of water. He set the tray on a bedside table. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry," she said, though her stomach was a hollow pit of anxiety. He ignored her, sitting in an armchair opposite the bed, his gaze heavy upon her. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "Why did you run, Stella?" he finally asked, the question hanging in the air between them, loaded with 5 years of unspoken hurt and fury. She looked down at her hands. "You know why. The massacre. My parents, your father, they were gunned down. I was supposed to be there that night. I was late. I saw it all from the car. I saw the men. I saw their faces." Her voice broke. "I knew they'd come for me next. I knew if I stayed, I'd die. And I knew if I came to you, I'd be leading them right to you. So you decided it was better for me to believe the love of my life was dead?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Better for me to spend years mourning a ghost, to see your empty grave." "What was I supposed to do, Luca?" she cried, tears finally spilling over. "Call you?" "Hey, Luca. Sorry your dad is dead. Mine too, by the way. Some men are trying to kill me. See you soon?" They were everywhere. The betrayal came from within. "I didn't know who to trust, so I trusted no one. I disappeared." "You should have trusted me," he roared, suddenly standing, his control snapping. The force of his anger made her flinch. He paced the room like a caged panther. "I was not some boy. I was your future. I would have burned the world to the ground to keep you safe. Instead, you left me with nothing but a ghost and a war to fight alone." "I was trying to save you," she shouted back, standing to face him, her own fear morphing into anger. "I didn't need saving, I needed you." He stopped in front of her, his chest heaving. The raw, naked pain in his eyes was shocking. This was not the cold, ruthless mafia boss. This was the boy she'd left behind. "Do you have any idea what it did to me, finding your car abandoned by the docks, blood on the seat? For 3 years, I believed you were at the bottom of the river, your body eaten by fish. I went half mad with grief." Eleanor stared at him, her heart aching with a pain she had long suppressed. She had never considered his grief. She had only thought of his survival. "Luca, He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb stroking away a tear. The touch was electric, a jolt of memory and sensation that travelled straight to her core. It was terrifying and familiar all at once. The moment I saw the report of a car going off the bridge, the moment they said the name Elena Petrova, something in my gut told me it was you, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I haven't felt truly alive since the day you disappeared. Now you're here, and I am never, ever letting you go again. You are mine, Stella. You have always been mine." He leaned in. And for a heart-stopping moment she thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. She feared it more than she feared Mark. But he didn't. He simply rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, breathing her in. "The man who tried to kill you today," he said, his voice now a low, deadly murmur. "Mark. He was a hired gun, a sloppy one. He was working for someone, and now that you are back, now that they know you are alive and under my protection, they will show their hand. Your return is the key, Stella. You are the bait that will lure the snake from its hole. And when it does, I will cut off its head." He pulled back, his gaze hardening back into that of the Don. "Get some rest." He turned and left the room, and she heard the key turn in the lock once more. Eleanor sank back onto the bed, her mind reeling. She was a pawn in a game she never wanted to play again. Her saviour was her captor. The boy she once loved was a man she barely recognised, and her return had just reignited a war. She was home, and it was the most dangerous place in the world. The next few days passed in a blur of surreal captivity. Elena was treated with the deference of a queen, but the vigilance of a fugitive. Her room was unlocked, but two of Luca's men, David and Paul, were always stationed outside her door. She was free to roam the house and its extensive grounds, but the high walls and electronic gates were a constant reminder of her imprisonment. Luca was a ghost, appearing for meals that were tense, silent affairs. He would watch her, his dark eyes missing nothing, but he spoke little, retreating into his study for hours on end, dealing with the business of his empire. She could feel the power radiating from that room, the constant stream of grim-faced men coming and going. It was on the third evening that she found herself in the library, running her fingers over the spines of leather-bound books she remembered from his father's study. The door opened and Luca walked in. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes pronounced. "Looking for escape routes?" he asked, a hint of dry humour in his voice. "Just familiar things," she replied softly, pulling a volume of Dante's Inferno from the shelf. "You kept your father's books." "I kept everything that mattered," he said, his gaze intense. He came to stand beside her, so close she could smell his cologne, something dark and woody. "This empire, I didn't build it for power, Stella. I built it for armor. To protect what is mine, to ensure no one could ever take from me what was taken that night." She looked up at him, her heart thudding painfully. "And what is yours, Luca?" He didn't answer with words. He simply looked at her, his eyes saying everything. You are mine." The air between them crackled with a decade of history and a pent-up, desperate longing. The memory of their last night together, the frantic, fearful kisses they'd shared in the garden, the promises they'd whispered, hung between them like a phantom. The moment was shattered by the ringing of his phone. He answered it, his expression turning to granite. "When?" he barked. "Where?" "I see. Keep him there. I'm coming." He ended the call and looked at her, the softness gone, replaced by the cold dawn. "They found Mark. He's holed up in a warehouse near the docks. He's talking. He says he has a name." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "What are you going to do?" Luca's smile was a terrifying thing. "What I do best. I am going to get answers." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "David and Paul will take you to the safe room. Do not leave it until I come for you myself." He was gone, leaving her alone with her fear. The safe room was a stark, windowless chamber behind a hidden panel in his bedroom. She sat on the cold, concrete floor, hugging her knees, listening to the silence. This was the reality of his world. Violence, fear, and retribution. This was the life she had run from. Hours ticked by. Every sound from the house above made her jump. She thought of Mark, of the boy she'd briefly dated, who had turned out to be a monster. She thought of Luca, of the man he had become. A different kind of monster, one who had pulled her from the water and locked her in a vault. Finally, she heard the panel slide open. Luca stood there, silhouetted in the light from the bedroom. He was still wearing the same clothes, but there was a spatter of dark droplets on his black sweater that hadn't been there before. His knuckles were raw and bleeding. His eyes were the eyes of a killer, hollow, cold, and utterly terrifying. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, and in that look she saw the abyss. He had gotten his answers, and whatever he had learned had shaken the unshakable Luca Rossi. "Who was it?" she whispered, afraid of the answer. He walked into the safe room, the space suddenly feeling claustrophobic with his presence. He reached out, his bloody hand gently tracing the line of her jaw. "The name he gave," Luca said. His voice a low, devastated rasp, was Ricci. Eleanor felt the floor drop out from under her. Antonio Ricci, her father's most trusted consigliere. The man who had given her candy as a child, who had danced at her 16th birthday party, the man who had given the eulogy at her parents' funeral. The betrayal was so profound, so intimate, it stole the air from her lungs. Luca's hand moved from her jaw to cup the back of her neck, pulling her forehead to rest against his chest. She could feel the frantic, heavy beat of his heart. "He thought you were dead all these years," Luca murmured into her hair. But he got suspicious. He hired Mark to confirm it. When Mark realized who you really were, he decided to collect the original bounty himself. Ricci didn't order the hit today, but he gave the order 5 years ago. He killed our families, Stella, to take the throne. Tears streamed down Elena's face, hot and bitter. She wasn't just crying for her parents or for the life she lost. She was crying for the sheer, ugly horror of it all. Luca held her tighter. He is at his daughter's wedding reception tonight, surrounded by his allies celebrating. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice muffled against his sweater. He pulled back, and the look in his eyes was one of absolute chilling finality. "What a Sicilian does best," he whispered. "I am going to the wedding." He released her and turned to leave, a king on his way to a coronation of blood. "Luca, wait!" He paused at the door. She stood up, wiping her tears, a strange, cold resolve settling over her. The fear was still there, a live wire in her stomach. But beneath it was something else, the stirring of the girl she used to be. Stella Rossi. "Take me with you." He stared at her, stunned. "No, absolutely not." "He was my father's friend," she said, her voice gaining strength. "He betrayed my family. He tried to kill me. I have a right to be there. I have a right to look him in the eye." "It will be a bloodbath, Stella. It is no place for you." "It is my birthright," she fired back, the words echoing in the small room. "You said it yourself. My return is the key. So let me be the key. Let me be the ghost that haunts his final moments." Luca studied her face, seeing not the frightened librarian, but the steel heiress he remembered. A slow, proud, and terrifying smile spread across his lips. "All right, Stella," he said softly. "Get dressed. Wear something black. We have a wedding to crash." The black dress was a column of shadows, a stark contrast to her pale skin. It was a designer piece, pulled from a walk-in closet she hadn't dared to explore, and it fit her as if it had been tailored for this specific macabre occasion. As she stood before the floor-length mirror, Eleanor barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't Elena Petrova, the quiet librarian. This was Stella Rossi, her spine straight, her eyes holding a cold fire she had long since extinguished. Luca entered the bedroom without a sound. He had changed into a flawlessly tailored black tuxedo, the white of his shirt a brilliant slash against the dark fabric. He looked like a god of vengeance, elegant and deadly. In his hand he held a velvet box. He opened it to reveal a stunning diamond necklace, the central stone a teardrop that glittered with a cold, inner fire. "A welcome home gift," he said, his voice low. She met his eyes in the mirror. "I don't want it." "It's not a request," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. He moved behind her, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp. The weight of the diamonds was immense, a tangible symbol of the world she was being forced to reclaim. His touch lingered, warm against her cool skin, and for a fleeting second, his gaze in the reflection was not that of a don, but of a man mesmerized. "You look like her," he whispered, his breath stirring her hair. "The Stella I remember." "She's dead," Eleanor said, her voice hollow. "No," he countered, his hands settling on her shoulders, turning her to face him. "She's just been sleeping. And it's time to wake up." Downstairs, a small convoy of SUVs idled in the circular driveway. David and Paul, now in formal wear that did little to conceal their bulk, and the telltale bulges under their jackets stood by the lead vehicle. Their expressions were grim. Luca handed her into the back of the car, his hand a possessive brand on the small of her back before he slid in beside her. The drive to the Grand Venezia Hotel was silent. Eleanor watched the city lights blur past, each one a memory of her other life, a life that was receding into the distance with every block. She was walking back into the lion's den, not as a victim, but as the lioness. The thought was both terrifying and intoxicating. The hotel was a blaze of light. Music and laughter spilled out onto the street. The Ricci wedding was the social event of the season, a display of wealth and power. As their car pulled up to the red carpet, a hush fell over the paparazzi and guests. They recognized Luca Rossi immediately. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a poisoned tide. But when he stepped out and offered his hand to the woman inside, the whispers turned to stunned silence. Who was she? Dressed in devastating black at a wedding, adorned with diamonds that could ransom a king, and on the arm of the most feared man in the city. Elena took Luca's hand, her own trembling slightly. He tucked it firmly into the crook of his arm, covering her fingers with his own. "Courage, mia regina," he murmured. "My queen." They swept through the lobby, ignoring the gasps and the stares, and entered the grand ballroom. It was a fairy tale scene, thousands of white roses, a string quartet, a glittering chandelier. And at the centre of it all, holding court, was Antonio Ricci. He was older, his hair silvered, his face wreathed in a jovial smile as he danced with his beaming daughter. The music faltered as they entered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned to them. The air grew thick with tension. Ricci's smile didn't falter, but it became fixed, a brittle mask. He gently passed his daughter to another dancer and began to walk towards them. His steps measured, his arms spread in a gesture of welcome that didn't reach his eyes. "Luca!" he boomed, his voice too loud. "What an unexpected surprise! To what do we owe the honour of the great Don Rossi gracing my little girl's celebration?" Luca didn't smile. His face was a carved mask of cold politeness. "Antonio, we were in the neighbourhood, and we heard there was a celebration of new beginnings." His gaze swept over the room, then landed back on Ricci. "We thought we'd pay our respects." Ricci's eyes flickered to Eleanor, a flicker of confusion and then dawning, horrified recognition crossing his features. The colour drained from his face. "And who is your companion?" Luca's smile was a razor's edge. "Don't you recognise her, Antonio? After all these years? You were like an uncle to her." He gently guided Eleanor forward one step, putting her squarely in the spotlight. Eleanor looked directly at the man who had murdered her parents. She saw the panic in his eyes, the sweat beading on his brow. All the fear, the grief, the years of running coalesced into a single sharp point of hatred. She let him see it. She let him see that she knew. "My God," Ricci whispered, the words barely audible. "Stella?" The name, spoken aloud in this room, was like a gunshot. A wave of shocked murmurs erupted. "It's been a long time, Uncle Antonio," Eleanor said, her voice clear and cold, carrying across the silent ballroom. "I was sorry to miss my parents' funeral. I hear you gave a beautiful eulogy." Ricci looked like he was seeing a ghost. And he was. The ghost of his greatest sin, returned to haunt him. Luca took over, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "It's a shame we can't stay for the cake, Antonio. We just came to deliver a wedding gift." He didn't move, but David and Paul, who had flanked them just inside the door, each reached into their jackets and pulled out not weapons but small black velvet bags. They walked forward and, with a deliberate slowness, upturned the bags onto the pristine white tablecloth of the gift table. 30 pieces of silver. They clattered and rolled, the sound obscenely loud in the dead silence. The biblical symbolism was lost on no one. Betrayal. Ricci's face turned a mottled purple, his composure shattered. "You dare? In my daughter's wedding?" "I dare," Luca said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "You betrayed your Don. You murdered my father. You murdered Stella's parents. You hunted the woman who was to be my wife. You sold your soul for this?" He gestured dismissively at the opulent room. "It ends tonight, Antonio. The war you started 5 years ago ends tonight." He didn't wait for a response. He turned, taking Elena's arm again, and began to walk out. The crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. They had almost reached the door when Ricci found his voice, a desperate, venomous shriek. "You think you've won, Rossi? You walk in here with this ghost, and you think it's over? My men are everywhere. You'll never make it to your car. Luca stopped and turned back, a look of utter boredom on his face. He raised a hand and snapped his fingers. In unison, from every corner of the ballroom, a dozen men, guests, waiters, members of the string quartet, placed their hands on their weapons. They were Luca's men. They had been there all along. "The city is mine, Antonio," Luca said, his voice flat. "It has been for a long time. You just didn't know it." He turned his back on the man, a gesture of ultimate contempt, and led Eleanor from the ballroom. As the heavy doors swung shut behind them, they heard the first scream. The ride back to the villa was conducted in a different kind of silence. The tension was gone, replaced by a heavy, somber finality. Elena stared out the window. The image of Ricci's shattered face burned into her mind. There was no joy in it, only a grim sense of closure. Back in the villa, Luca dismissed the men. They were alone in the grand foyer, the only sound the ticking of an enormous antique clock. Eleanor reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace, holding it out to him. "Here. I don't need this anymore." He looked at the glittering stones in her palm, then back at her face. "Keep it," he said softly. "It belongs to you." He didn't move to take it. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze searching hers. "What you did tonight, the strength you showed, I have never been more proud. Or more in awe of you." The raw admiration in his voice undid her. The walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart crumbled. The fear, the adrenaline, the overwhelming rush of the night, it all crested into a wave of emotion she could no longer contain. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Luca saw it. He reached out, his thumb catching the tear with a tenderness that shattered her completely. "Stella," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips, and then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a conflagration. It was 5 years of grief, 5 years of fury, 5 years of desperate, lonely longing poured into a single searing connection. His arms wrapped around her, crushing her to him, as if he could fuse their souls back together through the sheer force of his will. Eleanor didn't fight it. She surrendered. Her hands came up to clutch at his shoulders, her fingers digging into the hard muscle. She kissed him back with all the passion of the girl she had been and all the desperation of the woman she had become. It was a homecoming more profound than any walk into a gilded cage. This was where she belonged, in his arms, in his world, for better or for worse. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting together. "I love you, Stella," Luca whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I never stopped, not for a single second." "I never stopped loving you either, Luca," she admitted, the truth freeing her in a way her fabricated life never had. "I was just too afraid to remember." He scooped her up into his arms, carrying her up the sweeping staircase as if she weighed nothing. He didn't take her to the guest room. He carried her into his own bedroom, a vast masculine space dominated by a large bed and a wall of windows overlooking the city. He laid her down on the silken sheets and followed her down, his body covering hers, his weight a familiar comforting anchor. The world outside, with its violence and its betrayals, ceased to exist. There was only this, only them, the whispered promises, the rediscovery of familiar scars and new curves, the desperate, beautiful joining of two souls who had been lost in the dark and had finally, against all odds, found their way back to each other. Later, as dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, Eleanor lay wrapped in Luca's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare back. "The Ricci family?" she asked softly, afraid of the answer but needing to know. "Antonio is dead," Luca said, his voice devoid of emotion. "By his own hand after we left. A coward to the end. His organization is being absorbed as we speak. His daughter and wife will be provided for, exiled to Europe. They are not to be harmed. This was never about them." Eleanor nodded, a strange sense of peace settling over her. It was over. The monster was gone. "There will be others," Luca warned, his arm tightening around her. "There are always others who will challenge us. This life, it is never peaceful." She looked up at him, at the man who was both her greatest danger and her only safe harbour. She saw the love in his eyes, the fierce, unwavering devotion. And she saw the shadow of the crown he wore, a crown of thorns and blood. "I know," she said, her voice steady. She placed her hand over his heart. "But I'm not running anymore. This is my world. You are my world." A true, genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and lit them from within, transformed his face. He looked young again. He looked like her Luca. "Welcome home, Stella Rossi," he whispered, sealing his promise with a kiss. As the sun rose fully, bathing the room in light, Eleanor knew she was finally home. Her past had caught up, and it had nearly destroyed her. But in its ashes, she had found a future more powerful and more passionate than she had ever dared to dream. She was the queen of the underworld, loved by its king. And she would never let him go. The peace was a fragile, beautiful lie. And they both knew it. For 3 weeks, it held. 3 weeks of stolen mornings in Luca's massive bed, of shared espresso on the balcony overlooking the city he commanded. 3 weeks of Eleanor tentatively exploring her role as the returned princess of this dark kingdom. The staff began to call her Signora Stella. The men, David and Paul, now looked at her not as a prisoner, but as their Don's most treasured asset, their gazes holding a new, wary respect. She was learning the rhythms of his power. The quiet, tense men who came and went from his study, the coded phone calls that could last for seconds and decide a man's fate, the way the very air in the city seemed to shift depending on Luca's mood. She was, as he had promised, safe. But safety in this world was a relative term. It meant being at the dead centre of the storm, in the one spot where the winds were calm. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon that the illusion shattered. Eleanor was in the library attempting to lose herself in a novel when Luca's phone buzzed with a specific, urgent pattern she had come to recognise. He was at his desk, the polished surface holding only a laptop and a single old-fashioned fountain pen. He listened, his expression not changing, but a muscle in his jaw began to tick. A sure sign of volcanic anger. "When?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. A pause. "How many?" Another pause. Longer this time. His eyes flickered to her, and for a fraction of a second she saw not anger but fear. It was gone so quickly she almost doubted she'd seen it. "Secure the perimeter. I'm on my way." He ended the call and stood, his movements fluid and deadly. "We need to go. Now." "What's happened?" Eleanor asked, her book forgotten, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. "The Ricci consolidation. It seems some of Antonio's loyalists didn't appreciate my mercy." He came around the desk, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing, planning. "They hit one of our shipping fronts. A restaurant we use for meetings. They used a grenade." The casual brutality of the statement stole her breath. "A grenade? Was anyone? 2 of my men are dead. A waiter, just a kid, is in critical condition." The coldness in his voice was absolute. This was a message, a sloppy, emotional one, but a message nonetheless. He strode to a section of the bookshelf, pressed a hidden mechanism, and a panel swung open, revealing not the safe room, but an arsenal. Neat rows of handguns, rifles, and boxes of ammunition gleamed under the soft light. He selected a compact black pistol, checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, and held it out to her. Elena stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "I don't want that." "This isn't about what you want, Stella," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It's about what is necessary. You will take it. You will keep it on you. And if anyone who is not David, Paul, or me tries to take you, you will point it at them and you will pull the trigger until it clicks empty. Do you understand me?" The command was stark, terrifying. This was the reality he lived in. And he was demanding she live in it too. Hesitantly, she reached out and took the gun. It was heavier than she expected, cold and alien in her hand. "I don't know how to use it," she whispered. "The safety is here," he said, his fingers brushing hers as he pointed to a small lever. Point and pull. It's simple. His eyes held hers. Your life is not simple anymore. It is precious, and I will not have it ended by some Richie dog with a grudge. He led her out of the library, barking orders. David, with me. Paul, you stay with her. You are her shadow. Her life is worth more than yours. Do you understand? Paul, a man of few words, simply nodded, his hand already resting on the weapon beneath his jacket. They moved to the garage, a cavernous space holding a collection of armoured vehicles. Luca guided her into the passenger seat of a low-slung black sedan that looked fast even while standing still. David took the wheel. As they pulled out, the rain began to fall in earnest, sheeting down the windows, turning the world into a grey, watery blur. Where are we going? Eleanor asked, her fingers clenched around the cold metal of the gun in her lap. To the restaurant, Luca said, his gaze fixed on the rain-slicked streets. A Don does not hide when he is challenged. He stands on the ashes of the insult and makes his authority known. That's insane. It could be a trap. It is most certainly a trap, he agreed calmly. But it is my trap. I am springing it on my terms. The drive was a tense, silent affair. They arrived in a less savoury part of the industrial district. The restaurant, a modest-looking place called Bella Napoli, was a scene of devastation. The storefront was blown out, blackened and gaping. Police tape fluttered in the rain, but there were no police. Luca's influence had already cleared the area. The only people present were his own men, standing like grim statues in the downpour, their coats dark with water. Luca got out, ignoring the rain completely. He stood before the wreckage, his hands in his pockets, a picture of calm fury. Eleanor followed, Paul a silent, hulking presence behind her. The smell of smoke, explosives, and something coppery and sweet, blood, hung in the damp air, making her stomach lurch. One of his men, a capo named Marco, approached, his face grim. Luca. They left a note. He held out a plastic-protected piece of paper. Luca took it, read it, and a slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He didn't show it to Eleanor, but he recited the words, his voice a low, venomous whisper she could barely hear over the rain. An eye for an eye, a daughter for a daughter. The Ricci bloodline does not end with Antonio. Eleanor's blood ran cold. They weren't just targeting his business. They were targeting her. Specifically her. A daughter for a daughter. Ricci's daughter had lost her father. They wanted Luca to lose her. Luca crumpled the note in his fist. Find the son, he said to Marco, his voice cutting through the rain. Ricci's boy Matteo. He's a hot-headed fool. He's behind this. I want him found. I don't care how. Bring him to me, alive. As Marco nodded and turned away, Luca's phone rang again. He answered, and this time, his entire body went rigid. The calm mask shattered, replaced by raw, undiluted panic. It was a look she had never seen on him before, not even when he'd pulled her from the river. What do you mean he's gone? He roared into the phone, his voice cracking with a fear that was entirely new. He was with Rosa. How could you let him out of your sight? He listened, his face paling beneath his tan. He swore, a vicious, guttural string of Italian that spoke of utter despair. He ended the call and his eyes, wide with terror, found Eleanor's. It's Alessandro, he breathed, the name a broken whisper. Eleanor's mind went blank. Who? The world seemed to slow down. The rain, the men, the smouldering ruin of the restaurant, it all faded into a dull roar. Luca stared at her, and in his eyes she saw a truth so devastating it stole the air from her lungs. Our son, he said, the words hitting her like a physical blow. Time stopped. Our son. The words echoed in the hollow space inside her, finding a lock on a door she had sealed shut 5 years ago. A memory, hazy and pain-racked, surfaced. The frantic escape, the safe house, the sickness, the terrifying secretive visit to a clinic in another state under a false name, the positive test, the overwhelming soul-crushing fear. She couldn't bring a child into this life. She couldn't. She had run to save a life, and in doing so, she had been forced to abandon one. She had given him up. A closed adoption, arranged through a lawyer who asked no questions. She had buried the memory, the pain, the tiny, perfect face she'd only seen for a moment, deep, deep down where it could never hurt her. She had told herself it was for the best, for his safety. No, she whispered, shaking her head, backing away from him. No, that's not possible. He's safe. He's with a family. You're lying. He is 4 years old, Lucas said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fury and a pain so deep it seemed to physically wound him. He has your eyes, Stella. The moment I saw his picture in the file my investigators put together, I knew. I've known for a year. I have people watching him from a distance to keep him safe. He had known. For a year. He had known they had a son and he had never told her. The betrayal was so profound it made her legs buckle. Paul caught her before she could fall. You knew? She gasped, tears mingling with the rain on her face. You knew and you didn't tell me? He's my son. He is our son, Lucas shot back, his own control fraying. And I was waiting for the right time. I was waiting until the last of my enemies were dust before I brought him home, to keep him safe, to keep you both safe. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The Ricci loyalists. The note. A daughter for a daughter. They hadn't meant her. They meant Ricci's daughter. They were taking a child for a child. Matteo Ricci didn't bomb this restaurant just to send a message, Lucas said, the truth dawning on him with horrific finality. He did it to pull my security detail away from the park. Rosa, his nanny, she's one of them. She took him. The world tilted on its axis. Her son, the son she had never held, never sung to, never known. He was out there in the rain, in the hands of monsters who wanted to trade his life for revenge. The grief and terror that erupted from Eleanor then was a primal thing. A sound tore from her throat, a raw, animalistic cry of loss that echoed in the ruined street. All the composure, all the quiet strength she had mustered, vanished. She was a mother whose child had been stolen. She launched herself at Luca, her fists pounding against his chest, not in anger but in a frantic, desperate agony. You let them take him. You and your empire and your wars. You let them take our son. He didn't stop her. He stood there, taking the blows, his own face a mask of torment. When her strength failed, he caught her wrists, pulling her against him, holding her tightly as she sobbed. I will get him back, Stella, he vowed into her hair, his voice a low, shaking promise that was more terrifying than any shout. I will burn this city to the ground. I will tear the heart from every last Ricci and their allies. I will get our son back, or I will die trying. He released her, turning to his men. The grieving father was gone. The Mafia boss was back, his eyes glowing with a homicidal fire. Everyone listens, he roared, his voice cutting through the storm. Matteo Ricci has my son. I want every ear, every eye, every debt called in. I want the city sealed. Nothing moves without my say-so. Find Matteo. Find my boy. The first man to bring me a location gets $1 million. The man who brings me my son, alive, gets $5 million and a seat at my right hand, for life. He looked at Elena, his gaze a brand. You are coming with me. You will be there when I get him back. He wasn't asking. This was no longer about reclaiming a lost love or solidifying power. This was a crusade. This was about blood. Their blood. As he led her back to the car, the cold weight of the gun in her hand felt different now. It was no longer an alien object of fear. It was a tool, a promise. Her son was out there. And Elena the librarian was gone forever. In her place was Stella Rossi, a mother, a queen of the underworld. And hell hath no fury like a mother who has had her child taken. The car door slammed shut, sealing them in. The engine roared to life. Where to, Don Rossi? David asked, his hands tight on the wheel. Luca's eyes were fixed on the rain-lashed window, on the city that had dared to touch what was his. "To war," he said. The command center was Luca's study, transformed. The elegant desk was now buried under laptops, city maps, and a scattering of weapons. The air was thick with the smell of coffee, rain, and tense male sweat. Luca stood over it all, a general surveying a battlefield, his phone pressed to his ear. His voice was a low, continuous snarl of threats, promises, and commands. Eleanor stood by the window, the gun still a cold, hard weight in her hand. She wasn't trembling anymore. A strange, terrifying calm had settled over her. The initial tsunami of grief had receded, leaving behind a landscape of hardened resolve. Every maternal instinct she'd never had the chance to use was now screaming inside her, a primal directive. Find your child. She watched Luca, this man who was both her salvation and her damnation. He had known about their son. The betrayal was a fresh wound, but she couldn't afford to bleed from it now. There would be time for that reckoning later, if there was a later. "They're moving him," Luca said, hanging up and turning to the room. His eyes were chips of black ice. "They're using the storm. They have a boat. They're going to try and take him out of the city via the river." The river? Elena's voice was hoarse. The memory of her own plunge into that dark, churning water flashed before her eyes. "It's the one route we haven't completely locked down. They're heading for the old shipyards." He picked up a tablet, pulling up a live satellite feed. A blinking red dot moved slowly through the grid of the industrial district, heading towards the waterfront. Rosa, the nanny, had a tracker in her phone. "She's either very stupid or very confident. Or it's another trap," David said quietly from the doorway. "It's always a trap," Luca replied, his gaze locking with Elena's. "But this time, we're the hunters." He strode over to her, grabbing a black tactical vest from a chair and holding it out. "Put this on." She didn't argue. She slipped it over her dress, the heavy Kevlar and uncomfortable necessary shield. He checked the fit, his fingers brushing the straps, his touch clinical and efficient. "Stay behind me. Do exactly as I say. If I tell you to get down, you get down. If I tell you to run, you run. Your only job is to get to Alessandro. Mine is to clear the path." He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. The gesture was startlingly tender amidst the violence of the moment. "We bring our son home, Stella. Together." The convoy that sped towards the shipyards was a ghost train in the pouring rain. No sirens, just the roar of powerful engines and the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. Eleanor sat in the back of the SUV, Luca on one side, Paul on the other. No one spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and the frantic beating of her own heart. They abandoned the vehicles a half-mile from the location, moving the rest of the way on foot through a labyrinth of decaying warehouses and rusted machinery. The shipyards were a graveyard of industry, the skeletal remains of cranes looming like prehistoric beasts in the storm-lashed gloom. Luca's men moved like shadows fanning out, securing the perimeter. He, Elena, David and Paul approached the main target, a vast corrugated steel hangar that had once housed dry docks. A single dim light glowed from within. Luca held up a fist, signalling a halt. He pointed to David, then to the left, to Paul to the right. They melted into the darkness. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes asking a silent question. "Are you ready?" She nodded. Her jaw clenched so tight it ached. She tightened her grip on the pistol. It felt less alien now. It felt like an extension of her will. They slipped through a gap in the hangar's wall. The space inside was cavernous, echoing with the drumming of rain on the metal roof. In the center, under a lone hanging work light, stood a group of men. And in the middle of them, held tightly by a dark-haired woman, Rosa, was a small boy. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. He was small, so much smaller than she had imagined. He had a head of dark, curly hair, and he was clutching a ragged teddy bear, his little shoulders hunched against the cold and the fear. But even from this distance, even through the terror, she could see it. The shape of his eyes. Her eyes. Just as Luca had said. A tall, lean man with the Ricci family's sharp features stepped forward. Matteo. He held a handgun loosely at his side. "Luca Rossi," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "I knew you'd come. You couldn't resist." "You have something that belongs to me, Matteo." Luca's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the tension crackling in the air. "Let the boy go. This is between you and me." Matteo laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Between us? Your father and that bitch's father murdered my grandfather to take power. This has always been about bloodlines. You took my father. I take your son. It's only fair." He gestured with his gun towards Alessandro. The boy flinched, burying his face in Rosa's leg. A red haze descended over Eleanor's vision. The fear was gone, burned away by a rage so pure and fierce it was blinding. This man was terrifying her child. Her child. "He's just a boy," she said, her voice cutting through the din of the rain, sharper than any knife. Matteo's eyes flickered to her, a sneer twisting his lips. "And who are you? The ghost. You should have stayed dead." "I am his mother," Elena said, taking a step forward. Luca's hand shot out to restrain her, but she shook it off. She kept walking, her gaze locked on Matteo, on the man holding her son hostage. "And you are a coward who hides behind a child," Matteo's sneer faltered, replaced by anger. "That's far enough." Elena stopped, but her eyes never left his. "You want a trade? Take me. Let Rosa take the boy to his father. You'll have a much more valuable hostage, the great Luca Rossi's woman, the mother of his heir. Isn't that a better prize?" A stunned silence fell over the hangar. Even Luca was staring at her, a mixture of shock and furious pride on his face. Matteo looked intrigued, his greed warring with his vengeance. "You would do that? For my son? I would walk through fire." She took another step. She was close now. Close enough to see the nervous sweat on Matteo's brow. Close enough to see the confusion in Rosa's eyes. Close enough to see the tiny, terrified face of her son peek out from behind the nanny's leg. Their eyes met. His were wide, dark pools of fear, but in them she saw a flicker of something else, a recognition, a connection that transcended the 5 years they had spent apart. It was a thread, fragile and instantaneous, tying her soul to his. It was all the confirmation she needed. In that split second of Matteo's hesitation, the world exploded into motion. A gunshot rang out from the shadows, David or Paul taking out one of Matteo's flanking men. Matteo jerked his gun up, but he was too slow. Luca was already moving, a blur of controlled violence. He fired twice. 2 of Matteo's men dropped. But Elena's focus was singular. As chaos erupted around her, she didn't run for cover. She ran for her son. "Alessandro!" she screamed. Rosa panicked, shoved the boy away from her and turned to run. Alessandro stumbled and fell, crying out as his knees scraped the concrete. Matteo, seeing his plan unravel, swung his gun towards the small, vulnerable figure on the ground. Time seemed to slow. Elena saw the barrel of the gun. She saw the determination on Matteo's face. She saw her son frozen in terror. There was no thought, only instinct. She raised her own gun, the one Luca had forced into her hand, the one she had sworn she would never use. She pointed it at Matteo Ricci, and she pulled the trigger. The recoil jarred her arm, the report deafening in the enclosed space. She didn't fire once. She fired again and again, just as Luca had instructed, until the hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Matteo staggered back, a look of profound surprise on his face. Dark blooms of red spreading across his chest. He crumpled to the ground, his gun clattering away. Silence descended, broken only by Alessandro's soft whimpers and the relentless rain. Elena stood, breathing heavily, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling her nostrils. She dropped the empty gun. It hit the concrete with a dull clang. She didn't look at Matteo's body. She only had eyes for her son. She rushed to him, falling to her knees, Ignoring the hard, cold concrete, she reached for him, her hands trembling, not with fear but with the overwhelming, terrifying love. "Alessandro," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm here. I'm here, my darling. You're safe." He looked up at her, his little face streaked with tears and grime. He didn't pull away. He studied her face, his own filled with a confusion that broke her heart. "Mama," he whispered, the word a tiny questioning breath. It was a word she had never thought she would hear, a word that shattered the last of her defenses and rebuilt her entirely in an instant. "Yes, Piccolino," she sobbed, gathering him into her arms, holding him tightly against the Kevlar vest. She rocked him, her tears mixing with the rain in his hair. "It's Mama. I'm here. I've got you. I will never, ever let you go again." She felt, rather than saw, Luca approach. He stood over them, a formidable, blood-spattered guardian. He knelt, placing a large, steadying hand on her back and another on his son's head. His touch was gentle, reverent. He looked at Elena, at the woman who had just killed a man to save their child. There were no words for what passed between them in that look. It was an understanding deeper than any vow. They were bound, not just by love or passion, but by blood, by survival, by this perfect tiny life they had created. The storm outside was beginning to subside. The war was over. Luca scooped Alessandro into his arms, the little boy clinging to his father's neck. Finally safe. With his other arm, he helped Elena to her feet, pulling her close against his side. They walked out of the hangar together, into the clearing night. The rain had softened to a gentle mist. The city lights glittered below, a kingdom they had secured at a terrible cost. Elena looked at her son safe in his father's arms. She looked at the man who had dragged her back from death and into a life more real and more fiercely loved than any she could have imagined. Her past had caught up. It had tried to break her. But in the end, it had given her everything. A family. A home. A love that was as unyielding as it was dangerous. She was Stella Rossi, and she was finally, completely, home. Thank you for diving into the underworld of the Rossis. Did this story of ruthless love and revenge have you on the edge of your seat? Let us know where in the world you're watching from and subscribe for more tales where passion and power collide. What should Stella's next challenge be? Comment below.